Let's start off with our first big story. To be literate is a basic human right, a means of personal and social development to eradicate poverty, achieve gender equality, and ensure sustainable development.
So just imagine a world where the literacy rate is 100%, where every child and adult can access education at all levels. But a group in Abuja is now sensitizing the public on literacy by radio. Let's listen to their suggestions.
According to UNESCO 2015 report, over 62 million Nigerians are literate, a situation is described as very dangerous for the development of the country. This spike in literacy levels had drawn the attention of the Commission for Mass Literacy, Adult and Non-Formal Education, which is now partnering with UNESCO to find a way forward. The Commission had introduced literacy by radio, a program that will help large number of Nigerians who are illiterate to become literate. This, the Executive Secretary says, is one of many strategies which the government is using to improve literacy and eradicate poverty in the country.
Use of radio as a tool to deliver literacy is based on the fact that you can reach many more people, you can cover a larger area than you would otherwise have done with other techniques.
This commendable effort is designed to reduce poverty and enhance social and financial literacy among the populace in line with the present government's policy for increased productivity and self-reliance.
The inability of some state governments to take ownership and sustain the airing of the lessons had limited its success to Lagos, Bauchi, Katsina, and the federal capital. This one-day workshop is aimed at brainstorming on how to revitalize the literacy by radio project, put it back on track, and commence it nationwide.
In 2010, the program continued with a matching grant from MEMEC and counterpart from the funding from Lagos State Government. But from the year 2011, Lagos State Government has been handling the program alone with a huge amount of 10 million naira being spent on this program yearly.
To the size of the state, some areas could not receive clear signals from the radio station, but through the use of community radio stations. We're able to reach them through the community radio stations. There is inadequate radio sets for the learners. There is need for durable radio sets that can last for test of the time.
Stakeholders are certain that the communique that will emerge from the deliberations will usher in a new phase in the use of radio as strategies for literacy delivery in Nigeria.
Those are background information. Now, joining us is an associate professor of English at the University of Lagos, Austin Wagbara. It's good to have you join us right now.
Thank you. Good morning.
Now, let's start it this way. When you see someone and you say this person is literate or this person is an illiterate, let's flip it to the literate side. What are those elements you see? What are the visible things you see and you say this person is literate?
Basic consideration for literacy is the ability to read and the ability to write. But this can be seen on a scale from minimal literacy to full literacy. Minimal is where you can hold a pen or a pencil and perhaps write on give basic information. At the fuller literacy level is where you can express yourself in any form of writing and any form of reading. At that point, you become full literate. I want to say that, you can lay claims to full literacy, but there are also gradations of full literacy. Somebody who earns a living through writing or reading, who, let's say, given the example of Wole Soyinka, he wouldn't measure his literacy with just that of any other person. So that's at the level we could look at literacy. But like you've also hinted, literacy is a right, it's a human right. And my idea of it is for us to look at literacy as a way of sustaining civilization, just beyond what individuals do with themselves. Because you are who you are because of what you know. And one of the ways to sustain knowledge is through literacy. is a way of sustaining organized memory. What do you know of the past? What's happening in the future? How do you link the past, the present, and the future? And that's through literacy. Today, many of us in Nigeria, many of us in Africa, look to our past with some notion of denigration. That's able to happen because our past wasn't documented. And that wasn't documented because we didn't have formal literacy. There wasn't writing. Our cultures were oral most of the time. That's why today we're that. And we are who we are today because of that accident of the past. Our past has not been fully articulated, fully expressed, fully documented, because we didn't have writing forms. Today, we have writing, we have some form of literacy, but that same situation is occurring because we are not documenting our civilization, our development, our world. Most of what we know about ourselves is not from outside. So it's a basic problem of literacy. So as a way of sustaining civilization, even as a form of identity, as a form of creating knowledge. And this way you also create development. The taste, texture, and color of your development will determine on your level, forms, and patterns of literacy.
All right, you talk about sustainable sustaining civilization, but there's also some link now between literacy and solving the ills of our time now. Sure. There's talk about sustainable development, peace building. Nigeria has its wars already. What's the link now from your own analysis?
Okay, well, let's take one of the wars, the Boko Haram. What's it about? Attack on education. And that's able to be sustained because education is lacking. If it had been present, it wouldn't have been there. Literacy creates inclusion. Literacy creates development in terms of information base. If you don't have it, you're disadvantaged. And because society has not structurally done that, well, that has been a link. But then let's just piece it in a more organized form. As UNESCO has put it, at the individual, at the society, and the community. At the individual, community, and society. At the individual level, you acquire your own form of development, and that impacts immediately around you, gives you sustenance, gives you livelihood. At the social level, it creates cohesion, and at the global society level, it creates connections and links, networks that bring about development. For instance, literacy first gives you employment. And coming to the earlier question, illiteracy. You understand that? Would you say that your grandparents or great-grandparents who had no literacy were ignorant? We often describe people as illiterate, meaning they're ignorant. But that's not true. They are not ignorant, but that they don't have the ability to read and write, to document their knowledge. Ipanwan Tapa is a professional, but he might not be able to document his knowledge. Today we are going back to what people call herbal medicine. Why do we need to go back to it if it has already been there? Because it wasn't systematically documented. The knowledge wasn't stored. So at a point there came a gap when it got lost. We're trying to retrace it, but a whole lot has been lost. Even when you're retracing it, that gap or what is lost and cannot be recovered is gone.
All right, now the issue of literacy on one hand, civilization on the other hand. Now, a lot of people have argued that civilization in the context to which it is put in our society now is just basically westernization. And people feel, well, it's a way of imposing the West on everyone. So how do we reconcile when our music, our equipment, everything is from the West? So if you know that, then it means you're civilized. If you know that, then it means you're literate, as the case may be. So how do we reconcile or differentiate between civilization and westernization?
Well, the two are different.
Okay.
Every society has its own civilization. But then, for us that have literacy, by which medium did you get literate? Through the English language. Is that not a Western language? How many of us are literate in our languages? How many of us are literate in our cultures? So, for as long as that happens, our level of literacy, civilization will tend towards westernization. Recall that I said earlier on that because we lacked it, our past has been largely denigrated because we didn't document it, we don't know it. So it becomes that.
But we often read about Egyptian history, we read about Roman history, even the Jewish history and all of those, the Japanese, the Chinese, they were not all written in the Western, in English language as a case.
Because they had their own forms of literacy.
Okay.
We don't. Okay, let's just do a
but
basic
we have the
test.
Timbuktu in Mali, we have the Zulu.
Documented in Arabic. Isn't it? So let me ask you a basic question. Let's run a test, even starting from here.
Okay.
Can you read and write in your language?
Yeah, of course, personally, I can.
Good. So if you can, you have literacy in that. What's the percentage of Nigerians that do have that? Okay, if you have children, I can bet you your children are not literate in your language. They might not even know how to speak your language. We have a population of Nigerians now from age 18 down who mostly, especially in urban areas, mostly speak only English, can only write in English.
And that's impacting Nigeria
Sure, of course.
adversely.
Yes, of course.
I would also like to take you back to your initial comments now as to the Boko Haram menace. Now, of course, they are against Western education. But come to think of it, you see their modus operandi now. Of course, we know that, of course, they use the internet. They once in a while, of course, they are not exactly averse to civilization because we've seen some of their works now. So where then do we now, strike a balance? Now, I mean, this just appears to be like begging the question.
Well, the Boko Haram situation, like you've pointed out, in relation to their professed agenda, is hypocritical. Is structured in some form of ironies, dilemmas. You don't want something and you use it. The truth is that if they use the internet, they use military weapons provided by Western science, Western technology, and you say you go against Westernization, can't you see the contradiction? So I think that the argument is not against Westernization. It was just a propaganda by some squeezed heads. So I would say that if they do not want Western education, provide an alternative. And that alternative is not violence. There is no part of the world, there's no civilization I know that violence is their means of storage of information. Violence destroys.
And speaking of which, it also, appears funny and a bit confusing because when we even look beyond Boko Haram, we see that well-educated people across the world even venture into this form of dangerous occupation, talking about terrorism. We've seen sons and daughters of, of well-meaning who, of course, have advanced, have been privileged now. Indeed.
Attended some of the best universities in the world. Well, then that's it. Giving education and receiving education are two different things. What form of education did you get? And mind you, education is not just formal schooling. There's also some form of education that goes on at the informal level, goes on in religious circles, and that's a powerful medium. It goes on in terms of socialization. That's also powerful. And these happen more than what you do in a classroom. So these forms of education have gone on for too long, and perhaps as they were going on, they were unchecked. Perhaps the world pretended that it would just fizzle out, and now it has not. We've seen it. So the conscious effort to do it, but I still believe that the best way to attack it is also through literacy. Why are they afraid of literacy? Why do they attack schools if they know that what they have is a better alternative?
Okay, we'll come back to this. Now, literacy rate measures the percentage of people who can read and understand, write well, and think critically about the written word. Now, 50 years ago, UNESCO proclaimed September the 8th as International Literacy Day to focus attention on the major global problem of illiteracy, especially in least developed and developing countries where a large percentage of the population do not even have basic reading and writing skills.
Well, this year's International Literacy Day theme is Reading the Past, Writing the Future, and it celebrates 50 years of efforts and progress made to increase literacy rates around the world. It also addresses current challenges and looks to innovative solutions to further boost literacy in the future.
Now, literacy is a part of Sustainable Development Goals, which aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Now, the target is that by 2030, all youth and a substantial proportion of adults, both men and women, achieve literacy. Now, according to a recent data from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, there has been a lot of progress globally in literacy rates among youths in terms of reading and writing skills and a steady reduction in gender gaps.
Although literacy has been high on the development agenda over the past decade, 758 million adults from age 15 and above, two-thirds of whom are women, remain illiterate, unable to read or write a simple sentence. They are held back from their full potential and are more vulnerable to exploitation and human rights abuse.
Now, this reinforces the need for greater investment in literacy programs around the world if the new SDG literacy goal is to be met by 2030. Now, that's according to UNESCO. Enrollment in primary education in developing countries has reached 91%, but 57 million children remain out of school, and more than half of children that have not enrolled in school live in sub-Saharan Africa, and 103 million youth worldwide lack basic literacy skills. More than 60% of them are women.
So let's take a look at regions with the largest illiterate populations. Southern Asia is home to more than one half of the global illiterate population at 51%, and 26% of all illiterate adults live in sub-Saharan Africa, 7% in Eastern Asia, and about 4% each in Latin America and the Caribbean, and Northern Africa and Southeastern Asia. Less than 4% of the global illiterate population live in the remaining regions combined.
Now, statistics also show that Nigeria has one of the lowest literacy rates in Africa, with the youth literacy rate standing at 71.8%, and that's according to UNESCO's Global Monitoring Report on Education for All. Okay, now let's come back to the basics now. Statistics, trying to reflect the African. Now, Zimbabwe is rated to be one of the most literate in ratio, most literate countries in Africa. What's the difference between what they have done and sustained over time with what maybe Nigeria is doing and has sustained over time?
Well, one is basic education, primary education. That's where you get basic literacy. How do you structure a primary school? What's the pattern of enrollment? Who goes in and who does not? So that, if you can ensure that primary education is obtained by all, you would have achieved effective literacy rate. High literacy rate, because that way everybody could operate by way of reading, writing, and learning through that medium.
But Nigeria has the Universal Basic Education Program, where children, primary education is free and, in fact, compulsory. If I have to put it in parentheses, it's compulsory. So, how is that not helping, or how is that helping?
Okay, though is free, is it available? There are communities where schools are 10 kilometers apart. How would a child of 5 or 6 do a 10-kilometer stretch to go and get education, to go to a primary school? Is that possible? That's in rural areas. That's why you have a lot of the problems. So our education, in a sense, is elitist. It's affordable only in rural areas. But also know that it got even bad when even basic education got privatized. So public schools can no longer have the capacity in many states, in many parts of the country, to provide basic education.
So is it wrong to have privatized education or open the space where private players come in?
It's not wrong, but the point then is that if you take it from there at the basic level and make people pay for it, and most of the people are poor. We've ensured that a lot of people who cannot afford to pay are disenfranchised.
And are we not also still dealing with the problem here where we're still dealing with not enough teachers? I mean, many of our schools, public schools especially, we see teachers who are obviously overwhelmed, and that no doubt would impact on education. And it goes on from primary even on to the university stage and beyond. How do we address those issues?
Capacity building. We also have a situation where we have very many unemployed, highly educated people. So how do you account for it? It's just distribution of resources, capacity, being able to do that. So one is that the infrastructure is insufficient in terms of physical infrastructure. Then facilities to prepare the human capacity, the human resource to do that is also not well being harnessed. So that has become a part of the bane. And one of the ways it could be solved is to calibrate these things along the lines. Well, one, how many well-educated Nigerians who really want to go to the rural area to reside and teach? No. That's what the National Service Program would have taken care of. But that too is in a crisis. Okay.
All right. We'll come back to this shortly. Now, we're going out on TVC Entertainment, but viewers there can continue with TVC Breakfast on TVC Nigeria, Concert Channel 190 and DSTV Channel 418.
You could also watch on GoTV Channel 46 and ACTV 510.
GoTV 45, actually.
All right, and ACTV 510.
Well, if you're just tuning in, you're watching TVC Breakfast, and this morning it is World International Literacy Day, and we are looking at the literacy rates and what factors are responsible for statistics or the data that shows that Nigeria, parts of Africa fall short of the standards and all of that. And we have Associate Professor Austin Wagbara from the University of Lagos with us, and we've been talking about this. Now, the agenda is to have literacy by 2030. If we consider what we have on ground right now, where we are, all the factors responsible for taking us there, how achievable or how feasible would that be?
It's feasible if we're serious about it. So far, we're at 71%. So
towards actualizing
it by 2030, that's about more than 15 years from now, far more than. So it's possible if the program is addressed. I think the focus should go more towards the rural areas where we have higher levels of this. But then a major handicap now is the crisis all over the country. How feasible would that be in the northeast? How would that be in the south Niger Delta area with conflicts going on? And now we have many children in refugee camps, internally displaced people, obviously, and cannot go to school. So these things have to be addressed. The issue of conflict, peace will really be an option, a consideration in ensuring that we meet that target. Otherwise, it might also be a mirage again.
And UNESCO is also advocating at least 26% now being budgeted in every nation's budget. It's always been there. When you look at the 400+ billion naira allocated for education here in Nigeria, many scholars like you, Dons, have said it still falls far below the international acceptable standards. Do you think the government is giving enough priority now to revamping the education sector, or is it just, as a result of, realities that the Nigerian government has had to contend with?
Well, I think government has to demonstrate more seriousness than it's doing now in terms of funding education, and not just funding, but also building capacity. Like I pointed out, our education has tended more to be elitist. Why should university education be free and primary education is paid for? Is it not a crisis? is a crisis situation.
Or the other way around.
It should be the other way around.
Because university education is, of course, far from free.
Well, if you look at it in terms of the quality of what you get and what you put in there, it's almost free. We have one of the lowest rates in the world of tertiary education.
Public education, anyway.
Yes, public, yeah. Well, that's why you measure it. So if you now take that, you see that we need to address the. By the time you get to the university, you're very literate, highly literate. So if you do not get basic education, you've been excluded completely. So the situation, the focus should be there. And the case of Zimbabwe you mentioned, they were able to do it because they addressed basic education. And many other places, they might not have as many educated Nigerians, citizens as Nigeria has, but they have handled that basic level, ability to express oneself effectively in writing, reading, and also in speech at that level. Yes.
One other area is the dichotomy between the literacy of men and literacy of women. It's very lopsided, as the case.
Sure.
How can the gap be closed?
We have cultural practices that limit the opportunities of women. First, address those, okay? And where they have the capacities, how are they actualized? How many literate and highly educated women are professionals, are even practicing? So there should be perhaps a system where role models are used to create models that people could look up to and see ways of using this to enhance that. And then also use other arms of society, religious institutions, other cultural institutions, public campaign programs to empower the system, and also perhaps develop some forms of affirmative program to support women being.
And while we're also talking about, education, let's also briefly and finally talk about, adult literacy programs. There seems to be a lull now in enhancing literacy rates even amongst the adults. Where do you come in?
Well, how would you handle that? First, at the adult level, we used to have night schools, evening programs, part-time programs, okay? But do these exist at the basic level? No, they are still at the upper levels, okay? You have them at the secondary school level, have it at the tertiary education level, but we do not have them in any significant form at the basic level of education. So if you don't have it, people wouldn't be able to write. In the past, religious institutions did it, taught people basic this through either the church or the mosque. But now I don't know what's happening. But mind you, the focus should still be mainly in rural areas where that is very significant. It's there in urban areas, quite all right, but the opportunities exist more in cities than it does in.
All right, Associate Professor Austin Wabara, thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
and
Steve.
happy International Literacy Day.
A pleasant day to you too.
Thank you
very much.
All right.
Okay.